Welcome and aloha. I'm Mark Shklov, the host of ThinkTech Hawaii's Law Across the Sea program. Today we're going across the sea to Raleigh, North Carolina to talk with Jason Sass, a lawyer who has spent a great deal of time across the sea in Taiwan. Jason is Assistant General Counsel for the North Carolina Department of State Treasurer. He's also passionate about Taiwan. Jason has lived, studied, and practiced law in Taiwan, and he recently returned from a trip there. At this time of turmoil and uncertainty in the world, including China's desire to reunify with Taiwan, I've asked Jason to share his knowledge of Taiwan's history, circumstances, future expectations, Taiwan today and tomorrow. Welcome, Jason. It's good to see you. You're in North Carolina right now?
Yes, I am, and it's good to be here with you here today.
All right. Well, I want to just briefly ask you what gave rise to your personal passion for Taiwan, and why were you there recently?
Well, in both cases, it's a story of serendipity. In university, I was looking for an opportunity to study abroad in Japan, having a passion for Japan, until I, as a poor college student, went to the study abroad office and said that they told me I could go to Japan, pay my own way, or there's an exchange program with a full scholarship. And suddenly I told them about my passion of studying Chinese in Taiwan.
Okay. And why did you go back there?
Well,
what was your trip about?
Well, most recently, I actually was going back to visit my in-laws. I've in total spent 7 years in Taiwan, 5 years in Japan. I did finally make my way there, a couple of years in mainland China. But Taiwan is now where I have family. It's really a second home. And I was visiting my wife's parents and her extended family. And besides that, it's just a great excuse to go visit Taiwan again. It's a wonderful place to be, and I savor every opportunity.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, and I've asked you to discuss Taiwan today and tomorrow. And to do so, I think a little clarification is needed for us who are not knowledgeable about Taiwan. What is Taiwan, and who are the Taiwanese?
Okay, well, I think of Taiwan myself as the crossroads of Asia, or rather the crossroads of the East Asian Pacific region. It's an area that finds itself often the center of attention, but never a major player, always a secondary player, caught between China and Japan historically. It's a very large island, well known to the Chinese for a very long time, but actually, aside from a native Polynesian group, locally called the Aboriginal groups, it was who very sparsely populated it. It was not actually heavily populated until starting around 1600, the 1600s. From then on, where it became increasingly populated by ethnically and culturally Chinese, but with a very deep cultural impact from the Dutch, the Japanese, and the Chinese, all of whom have had periods of rule over Taiwan. But in all cases, in a very much an imperial context.
Well, are there endemic Taiwanese, and do the Taiwanese people, how do they relate? How do they define themselves as being Taiwanese? And I mean, who are the Taiwanese people?
Well, right now, Taiwan as a society is actually wrestling with exactly these issues. As the country, or Taiwan, the territory, however you want to define it, is really coming to grips with Taiwanese identity after really several historical periods of very extreme change in how the island was ruled. But it's really divided between now really what amounts to four major ethnic groups, each one with a very different historical experience, different societal experience and cultural, and really interrelationships between them. The major groups are first what you would call the ethnically Taiwanese, or they might call themselves the Hokkien. They are ethnically really Chinese, but from the area of Fujian, China, which is directly across the Taiwan Straits from Taiwan. So it was a very natural, progression if you're going to have Chinese colonization, Chinese people. Then it would be from that area. The next largest would be a group called the Hakka. It's Chinese for the guest people. They are a large ethnic group in China that are they're ethnically Chinese, but they're of a subgroup that really has no longer a native homeland. They were dislocated centuries ago, and now have scattered populations throughout China and Southeast Asia, and then also in Taiwan. And you have the native Aboriginal groups, which only comprise 2 to 5% of the population, but have a very large impact on cultural identity these days. The Taiwanese as a whole really draw from their experience with Aboriginal culture as marking a difference in Taiwanese identity compared to mainland China. And then lastly, the most recent addition is what are called in Taiwan the mainland Chinese, who are the people that fled China after the victory of the communists in the Chinese Civil War, and the Republic of China government that had previously ruled over all of China retreating to Taiwan. So it's those people that participated in that retreat and their descendants.
Okay, so you got four different ethnic groups, and do they consider themselves Chinese, or do they consider themselves Taiwanese, or both?
It actually depends on when you ask them, and it's been an ongoing process. The mainland Chinese, in the Taiwan context, of course, from 1949 onwards, had a very strong Chinese identification with the being Chinese as a nation. But over time, that has actually gone down over basically the process of the last 60 years and the different separate parallel developments of mainland China and Taiwan. The ethnic Taiwanese and Hakka, who are in some ways very similar and very close, consider themselves to be ethnically, culturally Chinese, but as a nation consider themselves they're very conflicted. Sometimes they consider themselves to be of the Chinese nation, not necessarily the People's Republic of China, but of a greater Chinese ethnic nation, and sometimes not, and sometimes both Chinese and Taiwanese, and that has changed over time as you look at the greater developments in Taiwan-China relationship.
It's interesting what you're talking about. It sounds like these different groups, and we have something similar here in Hawaii sometimes. Different ethnic groups. And I'm just wondering, how do these different ethnic groups affect the recurrent domestic relationships within Taiwan? And I mean, are there disputes? Are there controversies? How does that work?
Very much. So before about 1600, 1624, there was only very sparse population of ethnic Chinese in Taiwan. And of course, very sparse, has always been very sparse population by the Polynesian Aboriginal people. And it was only after the colonization by the Dutch around 1600 that they encouraged basically immigration by Taiwanese, by mainland ethnic Chinese. No government policy from the Chinese government, and it was really not part of the Chinese administrative state at all. And this was primarily the Hokkien people from Fujian. But then shortly thereafter, the Hakka came in, and they were always in smaller number. And there was always a great deal of conflict between the two groups. Just economic rivalries, rivalries over land, everything else. And having had a series of really imperialistic colonizer groups over top of that Hokkien and Hakka division. First the Dutch, and then a odd Chinese breakaway group that had lost the Civil War, the Ming breakaway group, having lost to the Qing emperors, very much a parallel of today, followed by then the actual Qing emperors came in, and then the Japanese, and then the mainland Chinese Republic of China mainlanders. And each one of those groups that had administrative power really set up very similar structure in which they played off the ethnic groups against each other, primarily supporting and bringing into their power structure usually the Hakka as the smaller of the two main sub-ethnic groups to play against the Hokkien, the Fujian Chinese. And that's been a long-term pattern. As I said, the Japanese used it very prominently from 1895 to 1945, and the mainland Chinese, when they came in, they did the exact same thing. And both the Hakka and the Hokkien have seen that power group to be a colonizing power, including the mainland Chinese, often seen as outsiders who are coming in and exercising imperial power. But the Hakka have always basically used the minority power group as the counterweight against the Hokkien, and the power group has done the same thing.
So what I'm hearing from you is that even though the Taiwan is one island, or there is at least a large island that is Taiwan, within Taiwan, there's a lot of differences. And this is first I knew of this, and it's kind of interesting that there's not a unified Taiwan culture. But let me ask you: do they all speak the same language, or what language do Taiwanese speak?
Well, language has often been used by the imperial group in control as a policy of imperialism. So right now, the official language, and it has been since 1949, if not slightly before 1947, the official language of government, of business, of mass media is Mandarin Chinese, which is the standardized dialect of Chinese throughout the mainland China, both during the People's Republic period and in the prior Republic of China period. Prior to that, the Japanese imposed and required Japanese as well. And prior to that, the Qing emperors, it was much more loose then, but basically very similar policy. It has to be the standardized Chinese of the imperial court. So very much a continuation. And in both the Japanese period and in the 1949 plus period, the Taiwanese dialect, and to a lesser extent the Hakka dialect as well, would be disallowed in any of those contexts. It would also be disallowed in education, where Taiwanese were not allowed to speak in school any dialect except the dialect of the imperial party, and with severe punishment. And it would also be used as a division to prevent people from being able to participate in higher levels of government, of business, and mass communication.
That is somewhat similar to experience we've had here in Hawaii too, where the Hawaiian language was basically forbidden and never taught. It's now changing a little bit. People are now trying to get more of the Hawaiian language into the culture. But it seems like Taiwan has different ethnic groups, and that may not happen. But still, trying to impose one language is kind of typical or similar as we've experienced. Now, I want to ask you, these different groups and their interactions and the controversies, do they affect international politics in any way? How is that resulting? What happens in that case?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Until the late 1980s, from 1949 until the late 1980s, you really had authoritarian central control without any popular participation in government. And that was under the control of the mainland Chinese ethnic group, really. And so they viewed, Taiwan as their temporary home while they worked to try to regain power over mainland China, make their return to mainland China, with really just a secondary concern for Taiwan. Now, over time, it became more and more apparent that that was just never going to happen. And thanks to really a civil rights movement by the local Taiwanese Chinese ethnic groups, the Hokkien and the Hakka, they eventually did loosen their authoritarian rule and then slowly moved to, a popular open electoral system. And you could really see from the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was slowly a shift towards foreign policy and especially policy towards relations with China in the direction of Taiwan for Taiwan's sake instead of just a continuation of the Civil War. And what's really interesting is that the first popularly elected president of Taiwan actually began as really the appointed successor of the family that had been controlling first China and then Taiwan as they retreated. And this person, Li Denghui, was actually native born in Taiwan, grew up speaking Taiwanese, Hakka, Japanese, because he went to a Japanese school, but he was ethnically Hakka. Hakka were allowed as junior members of the power structure as, again, a counterweight to the Hokkien. And then he moved the society to an open electoral system. And then in 2000, a member of the Hokkien group who had been very prominent in the civil rights movement actually was surprisingly elected president. And since then, it's been back and forth, but very much the mainland political power structure has been moving more towards something more inclusive just because of electoral politics. And that's been reflected in changes in foreign relations and relations with China.
Well, so that sounds like, am I right that things are progressing in a more unified way, that perhaps Taiwanese could be more together, all the different groups? Is that correct?
Very much so. In the last 20 years, surveys have been taken, and it shows that what had prior been a very different viewpoint in terms of national identity, Chinese versus Taiwanese, has been both moving towards a pure Taiwanese identity and a softening of the sense of these divisions, that now that all groups can really participate in local politics, and there are now a number of political parties, but they're all basically vying to have participation from all of the ethnic groups. There's been much less of an emphasis and a difference between those ethnic groups. The divisions are still there, the sense is still there, but it's been softening a lot, and there's been growing, I think, for the first time in its multiple hundred years of history, a growing sense of a unified Taiwanese identity. And one of the really interesting things is that there's been a great deal of emphasis of the Aboriginal cultural influence, which is, I think, a wonderful development, because the Aboriginals, very similar, I think, to the experience in Hawaii, have often been marginalized, just culturally as well as their access to society as a whole.
Okay, so that sounds like more of a unified Taiwanese nation, and more of maybe a prospect. As of today, Taiwan today is getting more together, and all the different groups are seeing themselves more as Taiwanese, if you will, instead of something else. Or although they still have these ethnic divisions. I understand that. And they still have some cultural issues, possibly. Is that a correct way? Am I seeing that right?
Yes, I would think that that's a very good description. I would say that it's very much a success story. It's the kind of thing that you really want to see in, a society of which there are so many in the world today, a society that has these kind of divisions, to see a real success story of how, they're really kind of coming together and forging this unified identity, which is a new identity.
Okay, well, let me ask you. That's Taiwan today. That seems to be progressing, and I kind of like what you say, the way you describe it. The People's Republic of China would like to reunify with Taiwan. That's pretty well known, I think, and bring it back under control of China, mainland China. What is the government position, and what are the people's position with respect to the PRC's desire to reunify?
Well, of course, the PRC, as near as I can tell, really just doesn't really believe the legitimacy of any of these developments, and really sees Taiwan as basically unfinished business for a number of reasons. But the Taiwanese, to a great extent, they're resigned to the fact that they're always going to be threatened by China with forced reunification, and it really ebbs and flows in terms of how likely they think it's going to happen and how likely they think they can basically maintain their separate identity, and how much they want a separate identity. But over time, there has been a steady trend towards wanting to keep a separate identity, regardless of whether or not that will be allowed. But the continual up and down flux of the prospect of being able to maintain that separateness, I would say that there's, again, steady increasing sentiment towards Taiwan being now a separate and distinct society that should, have de jure separation from China, at least the People's Republic of China, for the foreseeable future, even though they don't feel comfortable to declare independence because of the political realities. There's been times when they're absolutely resigned to the fact that there's no resistance. This big brother across the strait is just too big to resist. But no one seems to be welcoming of that, which is different from 20 years ago or 25 years ago, where a significant minority might actually welcome that prospect.
So I hear you're saying two basic things about Taiwan today. One is that the people are more unified, although they still have the cultural distinctions, and also that they have more of a desire to be a separate, independent nation, if you will, Republic of China, if you will. That's what I understand the official name is. Now, if the PRC decided to cross that strait of water and attack, or to claim reunification, what would the reaction be within China, do you think, the government and the people?
Well, I think the government and the military, being an extension of the government, would of course be fighting kinetically to resist that. And it's hard to say what the results of that would be. Popular sentiment, honestly, I really don't know, because the vast majority of the population in Taiwan, 90% plus of Taiwan, has a long memory, centuries long, of just basically being conquered by one imperial power after another. And so there's more of a feeling of resignation than a feeling of let's resist this at all costs, because their sense of nationhood is really still quite nascent. There's not a very strong, sharp sense of national identity and patriotism. It's growing, and you can see it developing. But there's still, I think, that long history of, being conquered by our large imperialistic neighbors is what happens. It's just what we do. It's our historical experience, unfortunately.
That's really interesting too, is that history of Taiwan and the colonial powers and all different types of powers taking over Taiwan, seeing it as a jewel, I guess, that they all want to possess, also affects today and the viewpoint of today and the future of the people and just the endemic or the Taiwanese mental thoughts about what may happen in the future. Now, I have a lot of friends in China, PRC, mainland. Is there a good relationship between, let's say, a personal relationship between the people of both places, the mainland and Taiwan, or is that not happening?
It's changed over time. I also have a lot of friends in mainland China as well. Uh, I feel that it was better when there had still been a little bit more um, diversity of opinion in Taiwan. But basically, as China has flexed its diplomatic muscle throughout the region, and most significantly, as it's basically exhibited the treatment that it has of Hong Kong, the Taiwanese have seen that as an indication of the treatment they can expect from China, and that has also fed into their greater feeling of separateness. Whereas the Chinese have reacted by basically saying, well, we were more friendly when we thought you were one of us, and now we see you pulling away, and it just makes us more agitated and more anxious than ever to take what we see as ours.
Are the people of Taiwan? You mentioned Hong Kong, and a lot of Hong Kong folks left Hong Kong. Are the people of Taiwan, are they at that stage where they're thinking, we better get out of here and look for another place?
A few people have, and there's a significant group of overseas Taiwanese in various places around the world who have done that. There's also a significant number of Taiwanese who have arranged for dual citizenship, though they continue to reside in Taiwan, to basically have their escape path. But the vast majority of people really just see current events as being an extension of the last 60 years of having mainland China always threatening to take over. And so this is just another round of the Chinese threatening to take away what they've worked so hard to build, and are just, again, resigned to the threats. A lot in differences of opinion. A lot of people think, oh, it won't really happen. But, there's always a difference of opinion. Some people wonder, well, maybe the saber rattling is for real this time.
Well, in the couple minutes we have left, I'd like to ask you your personal view of Taiwan's future, and if there are any Taiwanese cultural words of wisdom that would provide guidance towards that future.
Well, I think that left to its own devices, I think that Taiwan would continue to develop, as it has been for the last several decades, into its own unique identity and its own unique sense of itself. The only question is whether the world will let them do that. And in that specific context, the Taiwanese often liken their relationship with China as being the wife of, quite frankly, an abusive husband. And the husband is always telling them, well, we're a member of the same family, and you need to do what you're told, and I'm here to take care of you. And the Taiwanese see themselves as, well, I don't see myself being very well taken care of. Maybe a different direction is okay. And that's really a good context for their relationship.
I like your description and your viewpoint, and hopefully the future. I have lots of friends in Taiwan also, and I hope the future is good for Taiwan, and that it can progress and become more of what we see today in the future. So, Jason Sass, I appreciate very much your sharing your knowledge about Taiwan today and the future. And where it's going. So thank you very much. Aloha, and talk to you later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.